I have never forgiven my parents for the name they gave me, a name that, upon hearing it, everyone assumes belongs to a girl. But I am a boy. It didn't just make me the laughingstock of the kids at school, it haunted me my entire life. I thought, at the very least, the next generation of my family wouldn't have to endure the same thing. But then my sister, who is pregnant with her first child, proved me wrong. When she announced her daughter's name, I could hardly believe my ears. Crixtxel, a name so bizarre that it took me a few seconds to realize it was meant to be pronounced as crystal. I immediately knew our mother had something to do with this, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. But have I gone too far? I grew up feeling ashamed and angry about my name. My parents, who were hippies, thought that giving their son a girl's name was a bold statement, a way to break gender stereotypes, or maybe just an act of rebellion. But I didn't care about any of their philosophies. All I knew was that my name made me a target for ridicule. From a young age, I was relentlessly bullied. The kids at school would mockingly call me by my name, laughing and giving me cruel nicknames. I used to think that things would get better when I grew up. That a name, after all, was just a name. But I was wrong. When I applied for jobs, when I met new people, when I heard the stifled laughter of coworkers who had just read my name on official documents, I realized that the wound my parents had inflicted on me would never heal. They may have thought they were doing something unique, something unconventional, but in reality, they turned my life into a joke. I was the one who had to live with it, to bear all the consequences, while they never once admitted their mistake. In fact, they acted like I was the one with the problem for not being able to relax and embrace it. But how could I relax when my own name made me an outcast? There was a time when I questioned myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was letting other people's opinions affect me too much. But then I realized that my feelings were completely valid. A name is not just a name. It's an identity, a fundamental part of how a person is perceived in society. I am not a concept or a social experiment. I am a human being, and I deserve a name that truly represents me. For years, I tried to push these thoughts away, to move on. But then, when my sister announced the name of her baby daughter, all those memories came flooding back. I had hoped, at the very least, that she wouldn't make the same mistake our parents made with me. But no, she repeated it, maybe even worse this time, and this time I couldn't stay silent. I have spent my entire life struggling with the name my parents gave me, a mistake, a thoughtless decision that turned me into a laughingstock in the eyes of others. I once believed that after everything I had endured, at the very least, the next generation in my family wouldn't have to go through the same suffering. But then, when my sister announced the name of her unborn daughter, I realized that history was repeating itself in the worst possible way. Her name is Crixtxl. My sister pronounces it as Crystal, but the way it's written makes it impossible for anyone to guess. I was nearly speechless when I heard it. A part of me had already suspected that, under our mother's influence, she would come up with a unique name, but I still couldn't believe this choice. When I asked why she spelled it that way, she just laughed and said it was to make it look more special. I tried to stay calm, but I knew I couldn't. I had spent my whole life suffering from a wrong name, and now I was watching my niece being set up for the same fate. My sister doesn't understand, or perhaps refuses to understand, that a name isn't just something for parents to express their creativity. It's an identity that the child will carry for their entire life. I know better than anyone what will happen. At school, she will be mocked when teachers hesitate, struggling to pronounce her name. As an adult, she will constantly have to explain why her name is so strange. She will face rejection in job interviews simply because her name looks bizarre on a resume. And every time she sees it on paper, she will be reminded that her parents didn't truly consider how she would feel about it. I told my sister that if she liked the name Crystal, then she should just name her Crystal. Spell it normally, so the child wouldn't have to deal with unnecessary trouble. But she shook her head, insisting that this would make her daughter more special. I couldn't accept that reasoning. A name doesn't have to be bizarre to be special. A child will be special because of who they are, not because their parents turned their name into a ridiculous word puzzle. The problem here isn't just the name, it's the irresponsible mindset behind it. My sister, just like our parents before her, doesn't see a name as an essential part of a person's life. She treats it as a personal statement, a reflection of her own creativity, rather than something her daughter will have to carry forever. I have been through this. I know what it feels like to be trapped with a name I never chose. And I don't want that for my niece. I saw in my mother's eyes that she agreed with my sister. That only made me angrier. She was the one who imposed this mistake on me, and now she was passing it down to the next generation. I realized that this wasn't just an argument about a name. I was fighting against an entire mindset, a careless way of parenting that I had once been a victim of. And I knew that if I didn't speak up, my niece would be the next victim. I tried to stay calm when my sister announced her daughter's name, but my patience quickly ran out. XL, a distorted spelling, a thoughtless decision, a perfect repetition of the mistake I had endured my entire life. I couldn't let this happen to my niece. I looked at my sister and got straight to the point. If you want to name her Crystal, then just call her Crystal. Don't throw in random X's or meaningless letters just to make it look unique. This is not a brand. This is a person. She scoffed, thinking I was just overreacting. It's still pronounced the same way, Crystal. What's the big deal? She said smugly. A wave of anger rose in my chest. This exact mindset had made my childhood miserable. This same attitude had led my parents to ruin my early years. And now my sister was about to do the same to her own child. I asked if she had really thought about the consequences her daughter would face. At school, on job applications, every time she had to explain how to pronounce her name. Had she ever considered how it would feel for her daughter to realize that her own parents had caused all these problems just for the sake of a passing whim? But she wasn't listening. You're just bitter because you hate your own name. Don't push your issues onto my child. I let out a dry laugh. Oh, really? Do you even know what it's like to fight for basic respect your whole life? Do you know what it's like to change your name on job applications just to get an interview? Do you know how humiliating it is to have an entire classroom laugh when a teacher butchers your name? You don't, because you never had to live through it. But your daughter will. My mother stepped in, saying I was making too big of a deal out of this. I turned to her and replied coldly, I know why you agree with her, because you did the same thing to me, and you still don't see the mistake you made. I locked eyes with my sister, my voice laced with anger. You're being selfish. You're putting your ego above your daughter's life. If you truly care about her, think about her future instead of trying to turn her into a fashion statement. The room went silent. I could feel their anger directed at me, but I didn't care. I would rather be the villain in my family's eyes than stay silent while an innocent child was forced to suffer the same burden I had. My sister, furious, snapped that I had no right to call her a bad mother. I fired back, if you really cared about your daughter, you'd reconsider this decision. The argument escalated. Voices grew louder. Finally, I lost my patience. You are putting your pride above your child's happiness, and that makes you a bad mother. With that, I walked out, leaving behind angry stares and an uncomfortable silence. I knew I had just started a much bigger fight with my family, but I had no regrets. If someone had to speak up for my niece, it would be me. I walked away after the argument, but the words still echoed in my head. I had called my sister a bad mother, a harsh statement, one I knew would leave a deep wound. But I couldn't take back what I said because I believed it was true. I didn't say it to hurt her, but to wake her up. And yet, I knew my sister's personality well. Instead of reflecting on my words, she would only focus on the insult and turn me into the villain in this story. I wasn't wrong to speak up. I had stayed silent for so many years about my own pain, and I couldn't let the same thing happen to my niece. But my family's reaction made one thing clear. I was standing alone in this fight. The very next day, I received a message from my mother. It contained nothing but blame. She told me I was too harsh, that I was projecting my own traumas onto the family, that I had no right to interfere in someone else's decisions. I read her message without surprise. This wasn't the first time she had dismissed my feelings, and it probably wouldn't be the last. As for my sister, she completely cut off contact. I knew she was angry, but that didn't matter as much as the fact that I had done everything I could to protect my niece. I couldn't force her to change her decision, but at least I had made my stance clear. And yet, a part of me started to wonder, had I gone too far? I had been so angry. I had let my own painful memories cloud my judgment when arguing with my sister. Maybe I could have spoken more gently, persuaded her in a less confrontational way. But would that have made a difference? My family had always been this way. They never listened. Still, a sadness crept into my heart. I had already lost so much because of my name, and now I had lost another part of my family. It wasn't that I regretted these relationships. I just regretted that they had learned nothing from the past. Maybe, years from now, when my sister's daughter is old enough to understand, she'll ask the same question I once did. Why was I given this name? By then, perhaps my sister will realize that I was right. But I don't want my niece to have to wait until adulthood to understand. I want her to have a peaceful childhood, a name she doesn't have to be ashamed of or explain to anyone. No matter how angry my sister is with me, no matter how much my family sees me as the troublemaker, I will stand by my beliefs. Because more than anyone else, I know what will happen if they continue making this mistake. And no matter what the outcome is, I will never regret speaking up. After the argument, I spent the entire evening reflecting on what had happened. The anger was still there, but mixed with it was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I knew I had done the right thing, but perhaps the way I expressed it wasn't the best. I don't regret speaking up. I know all too well what it feels like to grow up with an unusual name. The alienation, the ridicule, the judgment that comes the moment someone reads your name. I don't want my niece to go through that. But was I wrong to call my sister a bad mother? I replayed those heated moments in my head, the way I looked at my sister and told her she was being selfish. Should I have said something so harsh? Maybe I could have phrased it differently, tried to persuade rather than criticize. But deep down, I also knew that no matter how gently I spoke, my family wouldn't listen. They never have. My mother keeps texting me, scolding me, saying I'm blowing things out of proportion. She says I can't just impose my resentment onto others. I read her messages and feel nothing but exhaustion. They don't understand, and maybe they never will, that I didn't do this for myself. I did it for an innocent child who is about to face a lifetime of misunderstandings. My sister, on the other hand, has completely cut off contact. I understand why. I insulted her, and she has every right to be angry. But I also know that one day, if her daughter comes to her with tears in her eyes, asking why she was given a name that confuses the world, she will remember this argument. And maybe, just maybe, she'll realize that I was right. But will it be too late by then? I can't change my sister's decision. I did my best, but ultimately, the right to name her child is hers. If one day my niece grows up and resents her name, I hope she knows that someone once tried to stand up for her. I don't expect an apology from my family. I don't expect them to understand what I've been through. But at the very least, I hope that one day they will realize that a name is more than just a meaningless string of letters. It is an identity, a life. And if that day ever comes, I won't need to say another word.